Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And today we're talking about Glass, which is by M. Night Shyamalan. It's the third of a trilogy that kind of sort of came out of nowhere. The first film was Unbreakable in 2000, his second feature. Obviously the first was The Sixth Sense, which made him a megastar. And the second was Split, which was 16 years later.
Yes.
And came as a bit of a surprise because the reveal that Split was related to Unbreakable happened in the final shot. So that was, and that's one of Shyamalan's twist endings, I suppose. Kind of a twist. And then it was kind of officially confirmed that something was going to be made of this when Glass was revealed, which takes David Dunn and Elijah, what's his name, or Mr. Glass, from Unbreakable, and James McAvoy's character from Split, who has the 23 different personalities, and puts them into a mental institution together for people who believe they're superheroes. It's kind of interesting, right? So, like, it's a kind of a universe, you know, like universes have become a thing now, and so it's an interesting sort of. I went back and watched Unbreakable the other day, which I haven't seen in 15 years, and I thought it was great. You know, I remember it being really good, and I was glad to find that it held up. And it's interesting how different it feels now. You know, this wasn't in an era when superheroes were that huge. There had been superhero movies, and this was around the time X-Men and Spider-Man were starting to happen. But you know, the world is so different now. And it's really weird to I mean, this is also pre 9/11. You know, like there's a whole thing in that film about how you know, this city's been through so much tragedy. We need a superhero. So I kind of anticipated all the superhero things that were going to come in the wake of 9/11, like wanting to constantly rewrite history in a way. Anyway, we might talk a little bit about that, but that's the vague background to what's going on in Glass, which is that it's taken 19 years to complete a superhero trilogy. Well, I guess we'll get into the plot and things. What did you make of it?
I liked it. I liked it very much. It's kind of scared me at moments. I thought what was most amazing was James McAvoy's performance. That's really what stood out for me.
He's great.
And the quickness of his changes, and you know, the fact that he can show you the change from personality to personality with nothing, with just his own kind of facial features, and that, you know, he makes you cognizant and aware of which person he's performing at each instance. I think it's really like a tour de force performance. It's meant to be, but he really succeeds, and he's absolutely, you know, both charismatic and skillful, and really he puts the others not to shame, because actually I think Samuel Jackson is fantastic as well.
Even though for the first half he's basically playing a Samuel L. Jackson blow-up doll.
Yeah, but you know, but he gives a kind of a minimalist kind of star performance, Samuel Jackson. And he's very alive and skillful. Bruce Willis is really put in the shade. He doesn't, you know, I mean, it's partly his role, I imagine, you know, but also he's kind of damped down somehow. So actually what stood out for me most was really, you know, the performances. Yeah, I kind of, I mean, there are a few kind of, you know, cinematic kind of things. There's those 360-degree shots when they're all kind of lined up together, but nothing stays with me.
I really enjoy actually the way that it's filmed and the way that I love. There's one thing that struck me. You're right. You're absolutely right about James McAvoy for one thing. Yeah, his performance is incredible, and what's really good is that the direction privileges it. There are times when you get to see him change from one personality to another in a shot, you know, within the same shot. And he does it like that because there's this setup about how there are lights in his room that they flash at him to get him to change personalities if he's getting too dangerous or whatever.
Yes.
And so they do that to him all the time, and he's constantly switching between these personalities at random.
Yes.
And it's incredible how well he sells it.
Yes.
You know? And
He's brilliant.
He is brilliant. He is. But I love the way it's shot as well. I don't remember the 360 shot you're referring to in particular, but certainly I recall towards the end of the film, I guess spoiler territory right away, you know, there's a superhero showdown at the end of the film of sorts. So they get out into the sort of front lawn of this asylum, and there are these shots that are just nicely composed. Everything is nicely composed. So you have Bruce Willis on the left of frame, on the extreme left of frame, and James McAvoy on the extreme right of frame, facing each other. And as I recall it, Samuel L. Jackson is in the middle, kind of watching them, not in between them, but sitting in the foreground in front of the camera, right? And like, this is not a revolutionary shot. This is not original, but it's just very nicely composed to set up this opposition and the fight that's going to happen. You know, something that I think you don't necessarily see an awful lot. There's a really brilliant single take shot in that fight where McAvoy is attacking Willis, and it's with the van with the two that Willis has hidden the two sort of workers in to keep them safe. And the shot is inside the van, so it starts off looking outside and you see Willis being pushed up against the van, and then the camera moves and within the van so you don't see it, but then you see a punch like land on the van. You know, so like so actually it would kind of, you really feel the impact of it because he's denting a van so strong as his punch.
Yes.
You know? But it's the movement of the camera and the way that it orchestrates things in single takes is really nice. And he does the same thing in Unbreakable as well. There's the first shot I recalled, or one of the first shots, is this setup on the train where you see, and actually it's used in Glass a little bit, really nicely, the shot of David Dunn on the train looking out the window. Remember, it's really nicely moved into in flashback.
Yes.
And the camera again moves in that in a way that is quite filmmakery, right? Like, it's very consciously a single take shot where you're moving the camera left and right to look at different characters, but nonetheless it is elegant. And that's something I really like about Shyamalan's direction, that there is thought behind it.
Sure, there is thought behind it, and he's very good at scaring you or making you uneasy, right? And you know, I'm not quite sure how he does it, really. I'd need to kind of look at it again and look at it more closely. You know, but there were things like, for example, in the asylum where, you know, just the reveal that Bruce Willis is opposite the James McAvoy character. You know, it's kind of, you know, it's a revelation that kind of becomes threaded with threat, right?
Yeah.
And with anticipation, because you know that something's going to come out of that.
And it's done through, again, a really nice, thoughtful composition of looking through the two doorways.
That's right. With
the two characters in there. It's lovely.
Yeah. So I think it has elements like that. On the other hand, I'm just kind of not very convinced by it all. You know, mind you, I had thought that I had seen all of the films previously, and actually, in fact, I hadn't. Right. So, and then I tried to watch Unbreakable, but I bought it. But it actually lost me halfway through.
Okay.
You know, and then I tried to watch Split, and for another reason, halfway through, my Netflix, I've been having problems with my broadband, and my Netflix just went off. Right.
But that kept your attention more than Unbreakable.
Yes. And it could just be mood, or you know, it could just be distraction.
I think in the wrong mood, Unbreakable is a slow burner.
Yeah,
really is. That's for sure. And Split is more conventional, more conventionally exciting. It's more of a thrill. You know, girls sort of in chains and what have you. But obviously it's got that fantastic performance again from James McAvoy.
Yeah,
switching those characters.
One of the things, I mean, just mentioning that. You know, it's extraordinary how good Shyamalan is in getting performances out of the main stars, and actually how poor those scenes with the girls feel. It feels like, you know, a zero-budget teen slasher film.
Yeah,
you know.
There's an element of that.
So,
I mean, I have problems with that just in terms of it's really not very imaginative, and the whole kind of the damsel in distress sort of it's there to titillate to some degree. You know, young girls, this sort of state of undress, being chained up. It's.
I don't understand the point of the film.
Split.
Glass. You know, I kind of so it's been all these years in the making. You know, it's kind of like the third in a sequel, and I'm trying to think, you know, what is the point of the film? What is it trying to tell us? And obviously, one of the things that it's trying to tell us is, you know, the world is like a comic book. There are heroes, right? And, you know, and so, but
I think it's kind of. When Unbreakable came out in 2000, there was talk about it being the first of a trilogy. I remember Willis saying, you know, that he thought at the time M. Night Shyamalan was working on a trilogy, but, you know, Shyamalan was very secretive and obviously went on to work on various other things. So it wasn't for a long time before it came into being. So who knows what that trilogy would have looked like back then, you know. But I think there is a real response to the way that cinema has changed in Glass, because for one thing, there's direct reference to Marvel.
Yes.
There's that thing about the giant tower.
Yeah, and that's in Philadelphia. It's meant to be, right?
Yeah, and it's this thing about, you hear it on the news and you see it on a magazine, and it's like this great new tower that is the new kind of marvel of the city. And what you're basically being teased at is there's going to be like a King Kong ending to the film. You know, they're going to have a fight in the tower,
or Spider-Man,
or that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
And there's one point, I think it's very deliberate and very funny, actually. There's a point where Samuel L. Jackson, he's the guy who is the comic book nerd, who believes that comic books, again, this was something from Unbreakable, who believes that comics are not just nice, entertaining stories, but they are a continuation of true stories of superhuman beings that people have told stories about gods that walk amongst us for thousands of years, and that's what comics are a version of. And the kind of thesis of the film is basically that is true. And so he's the one who, kind of obsessed with all of the comic knowledge, says, you know, the final fight has to take place at this building. And there's this thing about how the 3 of the floors of the building are dedicated to a chemical factory, and it's like, and so we're going to blow it up. You know, like real sort of hackneyed sort of thriller superhero nonsense stuff. And I think the film is very deliberately playing on that. There's also a thing about how the magazine that you see, the magazine cover that the building is on, describes the building as a true marvel. You see that?
I did see that.
You know, so I think that one of the ideas of the film is to sort of say, it's nonsense how Marvel treats superheroes, but this is like real like, if superheroes were real, this is it. It's like the film promises you this King Kong ending, or this superhero movie ending, and then it says, like, actually in the real world these get sorted out on front lawns. You know, I think that's kind of fun, like, you know, because it's very deliberately promising you that, and then you get nowhere near that tower. You know, I think that's kind of fun.
There's nowhere near the budget.
Well, maybe. But it's a star vehicle. It's got 3 stars in it.
Still, my understanding is that all 3 of these films have been made on a very small budget. I think, look it up, but I think it was like 9 million or 12 million for Split, and I think something similar.
Well, Glass was 20 million. Yeah, they've taken a pay cut to do it, haven't they?
Or they've gone on percentages or whatever.
Well, but, same difference.
Yeah, but that's a low budget film for an action spectacle, right?
That's true, actually. Well, it's not an action spectacle. I mean, this is the thing.
Well, but it kind of is.
It's a drama and a sort of
no. It's got a psychological. It's got a lot of action moments. Yeah. You know, and but that might be the reason for filming the finale on a lawn, you know, rather than on this wondrous skyscraper.
Sure, but I mean, I think it's not just a budgetary thing. Like, there is a project there saying like superheroes are, what Marvel does is nuts. Real superheroes fight on front lawns. There's something in that.
Well,
because there's also a thing about the twist in this film. It has a Shyamalan twist, as they all do, and the twist in this film is that the psychologist character, who's played by
Sarah Paulson.
So she tries to kind of convince them out of their delusions of being superpowered. But then the reveal is that she knew all along that superheroes are totally real, and she's part of an organisation that is trying to keep them away from everybody else. And there's a line that she has. I made a note. I didn't make a note of the exact line, but there are 2 points that she makes in this one line of dialogue, basically, where she says, when you guys show up, you always bring destruction, and it always escalates. And there's 2 points there that I think are really interesting sort of responses to the superhero explosion of the last 15-20 years. Because on the one hand, you've got the destruction, and people talked, for instance, about Man of Steel, and how in that film, Metropolis is just razed to the ground in that film, and that made people go, how many people died in this? You just didn't see them, which then led to subsequent films saying, well, we've made sure to get everyone, like, we're going to have a fight in a place that's been deserted, so no one can die here. Or you had the whole thing in the Avengers films about how they felt very bad about dropping a city on on the ground, whatever. So that became a deal, And then the other side is the escalation, which I think we've kind of talked about before, where if you look at the first Iron Man movie, when superheroes as a modern thing were really kicking off, as a modern universe type thing were kicking off, Iron Man was a guy with a fancy suit who can fly around punching people. And the last movie, they're in space, fighting through space and time across galaxies, and one guy snaps his fingers and half the universe dies. Yeah. So, like, as escalation goes, things have got out of proportion, right?
That used to happen in comic books as well.
So that's kind of... there's something in that line of dialogue that Sarah Paulson has. Like, we're trying to stop this shit from happening. Like, nip it in the bud. There's 2 direct responses to what the whole world of superhero mythos and fiction has become.
Sure, fine, but the film itself, is kind of clever and so on. But actually, I feel there's a lot of things wrong with it. All of the scenes with the young girls chained, by the James McAvoy character, seemed like really cheap and exploitative. And then kind of the other 2 main female characters are the Sarah Paulson character. And Sarah Paulson herself I like her very much. I mean, she's got these kind of liquid eyes, and a kind of a nice stillness. But really, I mean, she's the villain of the piece. And then you have that young elfin girl who appeared in one of the previous ones.
She was in Split, yeah.
She was in Split, who is such a cliche. I mean... it's kind of a character that I'm sure, would if feminists were watching these films, it would upset them, right? Like, it's
Stockholm syndrome for James McAvoy, basically.
Yeah, I mean, so
you don't know him like I know him.
I know.
That's basically her character.
It's very problematic. So I think it's a film that to me had a lot of pleasures, right? And that. And they basically kind of revolved around the performances, and also this sense of, the way that Shyamalan creates moods and fear, and there are moments that are like genuinely that jolt you, and so on. So I liked all of that very much, but I also think that it's a very insubstantial film.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I mean, but I did enjoy it throughout, basically.
Yes.
And I think it's interesting to see. For one thing, I couldn't predict anything. I didn't feel like I could predict anything. I really didn't know where this was going to go, and not in the way that like people watch a Shyamalan movie and they want to anticipate the twist. Not like that. I just mean really the general thing of really what is going to happen. Is it going to turn out that they're not really superheroes, and what's the explanation going to be? Is it going to turn out that they are, and what's going to happen? It was because I hadn't seen much like really kind of specifically like this. I thought, I just don't know where he'll go with this, and that was a very exciting place to be.
To be fair, I mean, I saw this in a very uninformed way, so and I suppose this is my own relationship with Shyamalan, because I somehow felt that I had seen these films,
yeah,
right?
well, yeah, I know.
And actually, it turns out that I hadn't, right? So I kind of went to see this third film without having seen the previous 2. So then you wonder, like, in what kind of a position am I in, really, to discuss the film and evaluate it and so on. So all I can go is, by my experience of it, I actually felt that I having seen the bits of the previous two films that I saw, I actually, well, I might have missed. Who knows? I must have missed. Anyway, I enjoyed the film very much as well. It was entertaining, but I really the thing that I came out with was, you know, two things really. Isn't James McAvoy absolutely great? You know, and secondly, Samuel L. Jackson deserves his paycheck. those are the two things really.
I was glad when he sort of came to life, because I thought, how long is he going to be this dummy for? And then it turns out that he's been faking taking his pills and being sort of catatonic the whole time.
Yeah.
And actually he's alive and, you know, smart.
Yes.
So it's lovely when he kind of he comes to life, and then he does that thing of teaming up with, because he's the guy whose bones break and he's in a wheelchair, and he teams up with the guy who is superhuman, like properly superhuman.
Yes.
Turns into the Beast and kind of gets him to do his bidding.
Yes.
And I think it's beautifully shot. I mean, I don't want to overstate that, but I think it's really nice and interesting to look at. And I like the way that Shyamalan uses the camera. I like that basically every film of his that I've seen. Even the ones that people don't really like. So I really like The Village, for instance, which I know people are really down on. But to be fair, I didn't see that when it came out. I saw that in the last year or so. And I found that a really fascinating... I mean, basically, it's a film about Afghanistan and the Iraq War and kind of American fear around sort of 2003, 2004, and wanted to kind of shut yourself off and just not listen to things. And I think, like, as a metaphor, it's fucking brilliant. I think it's a really interesting piece of work, though it has significant problems. But what people will kind of always pick up on is like, well, it logically makes no sense. How would they not know that blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And that's just annoying. Like, it's kind of not buying into the concepts a little bit.
Yes.
This doesn't have anything that smart, I don't think. And it does feel a little bit seat of the pants in a way, because like it seems that like the trilogy has now come to fruition after such a long time that it's kind of like the stuff that you see in this to some extent can't possibly have been in the original plan, because like I say, there's things that feel like such a deliberate response to the way the world and the way that cinema has changed. And things that maybe aren't deliberate, but just kind of feel natural. Like there's a feeling in this film of the normality of superheroes that I think has to have come out, that wouldn't exist had this film been made in, say, 2006. Because the way in which the Marvel and DC movies treat superheroes as everyday things, and like celebrities and what have you, like they treat, like there's that scene in I don't know, one of the later Marvel movies where Thor and Loki are sort of standing in some street in New York. I think it's called Thor Ragnarok. They're standing in some street in New York, and then like some girls come up to them and say, "Oh, can we have a selfie?" There's a thing in that of like, you know, superheroes are totally normal in this world, real superheroes, and like that has needed 10 years of work to get to that point. And I think that's a feeling that you get in this. There's a feeling of the normality of superheroes, and like the way in which Bruce Willis in particular conceives of himself as a superhero feels like it has been normalised. Like right at the start, you're introduced with him and his son, who's the same actor from Unbreakable, which I think is great, and you recognise him. And they're talking about the news reports about him, and people call him the Overseer. And there's this thing about his nickname, and it's a joke, right? There's a thing about he's called the Overseer now, and he much prefers it to Tiptoe Man or something, you know. And he says like, "Never call me Tiptoe Man again." So like they turn it into this joke, but nonetheless, there's a normalisation of superheroes within the real world that this film just kind of integrates and uses. That is a consequence of the way that superhero movies have dominated for so long. Anyway, I don't really know what my point is, but just I think it's interesting. I think like, there were interesting things to look at and consider the whole time, the whole way through. This film as a response to Marvel and DC and that sort of thing. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know either, because you know, the whole response to Marvel and DC has also been through independent comic books, and of course, you know, there are entire sequences set in comic book shops, you know, and there are references kind of to, you know, the comic books. So I don't know, and I think that certainly what's done here is it kind of normalizes the superpowers and allows them to be interpreted in other ways, right? So to have to be stronger, or to be able to kind of read people. It's something that it's almost like kind of on the verge of human. Yeah, it's just kind of like one step. It's like a skill, or what they used to be called a grace. That people were graced with a particular skill, right? So, and even to make kind of an illness, a split personality, into, something that kind of endows you with particular strengths, which is really kind of, the way that in common discourse is often talked about in relation to particular kinds of autism, So kind of, it makes you less able in some areas and it increases abilities in another, right? So the film treats superpowers along ways that are kind of legible or understandable in quotidian life, in normal life, yeah. So I think, but that was also the case with a lot of independent kind of comic books. I don't think in doing that it's doing anything particularly new. No. The film, But
in the context of the films around it, I think it's interesting to look at. It feels oddball and different.
Yes,
it offers you something quite different.
I'm kind of, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much, but I also felt that it lacked depth. And also that certain sequences were just cheap. I don't know how else to describe it, and that actually the whole of the relationships were really superficial. I wanted more depth from the father-son relationship. I wanted more depth from the mother-son relationship. And I wanted, something more interesting from the relationship of the James McAvoy character to his analyst. I think all of those things are quite superficial.
Yeah, Sarah Paulson has quite an unenviable job in this, I think. She reminded me rather of Skylar, played by Anna Gunn from Breaking Bad. There was this kind of discourse, I say discourse, it was just idiots, saying basically that Skylar was a bitch and they didn't like her. And the reason was that she was the character who kind of ruined everyone's fun. Because you had Walter White going off, making meth, blowing people up, killing them. And then you had Anna Gunn, Skylar, going, you have a child and a wife and a newborn baby. Like, this is not okay. You are endangering us.
Yes.
And she was a character who basically was the reality check on all of this. And so people really hated her because they stopped their hero. She stopped their hero having fun. And Sarah Paulson rather reminded me of that because I think she kind of kills the momentum of the movie sometimes. I'm not proud of having responded this way, but I basically thought whenever she came on screen, I thought, oh, for God's sake, not her again, because she was a character before the reveal where she's just the psychoanalyst trying to convince them that they're not superheroes. You see them interacting or kind of just noticing each other in the building, wondering how they're going to react to things and how they're going to develop. And it's all very interesting. And then she pops up and she goes, logic, science, psychiatry. And you go, oh, this is so boring. You're just stopping me having fun.
Well, I think it's more than that. I think this is a director who has problems with women. All of the female characters in this film are really dodgy and questionable, and So kind of one character would be maybe a mistake or a fault, but all of them, is a real issue.
The actress who plays Elijah's mum, Charlene Woodard, is 65 and Samuel L. Jackson is 70.
That's what happens when you're a star.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? There's one more thing, which is the very ending, which is where they release all this footage. There was this, again, it's part of the twist ending, that Sarah Paulson has put all these cameras around the asylum to catch anyone getting up to anything, and then Elijah is able to use those against her by getting all this footage of them being superheroes and doing kind of extraordinary things, and they release it to the internet. And there's this scene at Grand Central Terminal right at the end of the film. I think it's the last shot or last few shots, which are because the three superheroes or super powered characters, not necessarily heroes, have died. They're killed by this organisation. So there's a real sense of finality to the trilogy, which I like. And they're kind of three, sort of accomplices: the mother and the former prisoner girl and the son are releasing all this footage that Elijah has liberated for them. And they sit in Grand Central Terminal watching people receive this on their phones. And there's this thing of like people go, oh my god, and that to me was the most unrealistic thing about the film, because you see some of this footage and it's things like David Dunn throwing a bloke into a car, people being really strong, James McAvoy sprinting, sort of running like a dog across the field, across the lawn, and this was all footage that like basically I thought if I got this on my phone I'd go, oh that's weird. And then put it down. And no one would respond like this. Or you go, well, that's clearly fake. No one would respond like this, going, oh, superheroes are real.
Yes.
That was actually the most unrealistic thing about the film for me. That people would respond like that. That didn't show a very nuanced understanding of human psychology.
But let's not lose sight, really. I mean, I thought it was really fun to watch. And I enjoyed it very much. And it's great to see all the three stars again. I wish Bruce Willis had been given, something more worthy of him in a way. But it was still great to see Samuel L. Jackson, and James McAvoy is fantastic, and it's worth seeing the film just for him, actually. So that said, I think it's, I'm not a fan.
Oh, that's interesting. Because, I mean, you definitely had fun.
I did.
You saw it before I did, and you texted me saying, oh, you'll like it.
Yeah.
And I did. So,
well, but it's kind of, so we've often talked about kind of films that you might not enjoy so much, but that somehow grow in your mind afterwards, right? Well, this is the opposite. I mean, I kind of, I really enjoyed it. And actually kind of, I haven't thought very much about it. And it kind of, and part of the reason is, there's not much, it didn't give me much to think about, and it kind of like diminishes upon thinking about it for me.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But I like Shyamalan's use of the camera. I think it's a joy for me to watch the way he moves the camera, even if sometimes it's very noticeable and you think this is a real film student sort of move in a way.
Yes.
Like it doesn't necessary sometimes, but you think, no, I like it though.
Yeah.
I like a little bit of
deliberation.
Right, and a little bit of just putting yourself on screen, and so, like the depth of field and staging things in depth and things as well. Like when Elijah sort of sets Kevin on all the guards and kind of just wheels away, and it's that thing of like the cool guy walking away from the explosion type of shot. But who cares, right? It's nice. It's fun. And it was nicely shot and nice to look at and everything. And I liked all that sort of thing. And there's one final thing, which is not really about the film. It's about M. Night Shyamalan, which is because we looked up his the pronunciation of his name before recording this because I wanted to be sure. And I'm pretty sure it's Shyamalan as we've been saying it. And this is the way I'd heard it years ago. But there's a thing about people, for a long time, basically just not taking him seriously, not taking this and making a joke out of his name. And the reason that this is kind of cropped up for me is because it came up on Twitter, I don't know, 6 months ago maybe. And I guess they'd released a trailer for Glass or something, and so his name was in the press again. And people, Americans, were referring to him as M. Night Shyamalama Ding Dong. And
that's terrible.
I thought actually this is like, I really, really hated that because basically people,
so racist.
Well, people really called them out on being racist. And this is the thing that really annoyed me more than the racism, is they said, no, I'm not calling him Shyamalama Ding Dong because he's Indian. I'm calling him Shyamalama Ding Dong because he's a ding dong. And I'm like, okay, when have you ever used the word ding dong in an insulting way for anyone? No one does that. No one has ever called anyone a ding dong. At least not after they turned 6.
It used to be a term.
The reason that they do it is because because they have no respect for him. They wouldn't any other. Why is it just him who gets the
because
funny name?
Because he's got that foreign name. That's why.
Exactly. That's why. And it really pissed me off. And so like the lying, basically, like being caught and then making up a shit lie, pissed me off more even than the racism, which pissed me off anyway. I mean, I think he's made some not very good movies, M. Night Shyamalan, but I do think a lot of them actually get less respect than they deserve.
Well, the interesting thing also is that he's got huge fans. He's got he's got fans of his work that are very not only enthusiastic but studied, right? So, you know, what you're saying in relation to his shots or something, you know, there are fans of his work that actually kind of pay great attention to that kind of, you know, have studied it, that put up frame grabs online and things like that. So, you know, kind of, yeah, there's an enthusiasm for the way that he films that I myself really don't see, but I'm certainly kind of open to, you know.
And I also think his writing and his story kind of structure and things, or just the way he wants a story to go. He's kind of one of those directors who has a bit of a name, and you kind of obliquely think like, oh, what if he did a Marvel movie or something? And you go, actually, he probably wouldn't, because he'd want to do something just a little bit less formulaic. Even if what he comes up with isn't very good in the end, you always feel like he wants to do something interesting.
I've heard the argument that actually, you know, part of the reason why his middle films aren't so good is because they're really big studio productions, and that actually that constrained. You know,
he had to do Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think I didn't see that one.
Yeah, I saw it. I like it.
Yeah.
And you know, kind of, I've read that these films are made kind of independently, and they're made in Philadelphia, right, where he lives, right, and you know, on a low budget and so on. And actually, kind of, that makes it, you know, quite interesting. And ostensibly, you know, maybe part of the reason why the films have gotten better, though, you know, I'm not in a position to say, is because over the last few, because he's worked with these budgets, he's had control.
I would imagine so. You can tell, I think. And, yeah.
Okay, well, let's wrap this up. Last words?
The twist is, I hated it.
Glass on glass.
I liked it. I had fun, and you know, it's something just a little bit different, and you know, just a little bit offbeat.
Yes.
And you get to see some good actors do acting.
And McAvoy is better than good. He is astonishing.
Yeah, he's great.
All right, so this is Eavesdropping at the Movies. Thank you very much for listening. We are on
iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube to listen to. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.